Welcome. Thank you for joining this webinar, where we will talk about why organizations struggle with change and how to build adaptive organizations. We all know that famous quote, the only constant in life is change, right? And we know that to be true in the business context as well. So we've always seen organizations always had a need to change and always will. And the purpose, of course, is to keep up with ever-changing circumstances in the environment in which they operate in order to succeed and survive. There are continuous changes in the environment, like the market, competition, customer behavior, problems and needs of customers, new technologies, and so on. So we see organizations change their processes, tools, restructuring, reorganizing, doing digital transformations, agile transformations, AI adoption, and so on. Well, this is not going away, right? In fact, the rate of these changes is becoming faster and faster. So organizations really need to master this process of change and have internal capabilities to change rapidly and successfully. So learning how to change is more important than the change itself. In today's webinar, we are going to talk about why some organizations struggle with change, what are other organizations doing to be more adaptable and have more success with it. There are many challenges, of course, and aspects to change, and it's a huge topic. What I will try to do here today is to share with you some of the things which I believe are a foundation to enable success. So a little bit about myself. My name is Nino Zeljko, and I'm located in Zagreb, Croatia. I started my career as a software developer, and I have more than 10 years of software development experience. And in 2011, I found myself working in a Scrum team as a developer. So that was a career-changing experience for me. So after that, I have 5 years of hands-on experience working in Scrum teams as a developer, as a Scrum Master, as a product owner. And for the last 12 years, I work as an Agile coach and trainer, trying to help others with adoption of Agile and improving how they work. During those years, I have coached many teams in leadership. I've been a part of many change initiatives and gained years of experience with Agile transformations. And today I am a part of Better Change, and I'm also a certified Scrum trainer in Scrum Alliance. So a little bit about Better Change. So we are a global collective of change agents and agility experts from Europe and North America. And our goal is to help organizations with durable and meaningful change to improve their business. A little bit about what we do. We at Better Change believe that people are at the center of this, right? And that you don't make changes to people, but with people. And these are some of the things that we do and specialize in, like change management, coaching and training, leadership development, team improvement, just to list a few. So let's start with a question to you. So before this question, I just want to be clear. When I use the term change initiative, I'm mostly thinking of big organizational changes like transformations, but also smaller changes on a smaller scale, for example, on a team level. So what I would like for you to do is to think about what are the reasons that change initiatives fail in your experience, and just put it in the chat. Changes are hard, yeah, definitely. Lack of alignment, for sure. Fear of the new, unknown, uncertainty. People do only what makes sense to them. No sense of urgency. Yeah, why would we change? Sometimes it requires a change on a personal level. No clear first next steps to take. Good, good. Thank you for these inputs. We will come to that a little bit later. Fear of stepping out of my comfort zone. Nice. Okay, we'll come to this a bit later, but first, I would like to share with you a story I have seen in a documentary a few years ago, fascinating documentary about reintroduction of wolves in Yellowstone National Park in '95. I don't know if you've seen it, but the story goes like this. The wolves originally lived in Yellowstone, but they were eradicated by the people and hunting by the mid 30s. And after the loss of a native apex predator in Yellowstone, the elk populations exploded. So elks are kind of a big deers, herbivores. They eat grass and stuff like that, which was devastating for the local vegetation and changed the ecosystem. And they tried a lot of things that didn't work. And in '95, wolves were introduced to Yellowstone, which not only restored predator-prey dynamics, but also physically reshaped the landscape. And I was amazed by that. So reduced elk populations and their altered behavior allowed for the plants, particularly along the rivers, to regenerate, stabilizing the soil, preventing erosion. With stronger banks of the rivers deepened and retained water more effectively, creating healthier wetland habitats. This in turn supported beavers to start building dams, birds, fish, and countless other species, increasing overall biodiversity. For example, elk carcasses from wolves hunting provided food for bears, bald eagles, and ravens. So basically what we have is, by reintroducing wolves into this ecosystem, they influenced the behavior of the elks and their population, and ultimately changed the flow of rivers to some degree and revitalized an entire ecosystem. So I was amazed by that story. And besides the fact that it's a fascinating story, I shared it with you to emphasize one thing. In complex systems where things are interconnected and interdependent, like in nature, actions don't always produce predictable outcomes. So what is a complex system? Well, if we compare a machine and nature, for example, machine has a lot of parts that are connected and working together, but machine is has a static nature, right? It's really a predictable system and a repetitive system in the sense that whenever we make one action, um, it's predictable. The outcome of that action is predictable, and it's always going to be the same. So it's repetitive. On the other hand, like we have in nature, which is a complex system, these systems are dynamic. They are changing over time, and actions that we do in complex systems are less, the outcomes are less predictable. So when you think about organizations, organizations are an instance of a complex system. So let me tell you a little bit about my background. So over the years that I was working with the clients on change initiatives, agile transformations, and so on, I've noticed similar mindset and approach to change. And that is, first we design the solution, static blueprint of a new organization, an end state. Then we develop a plan to execute. We run a project to implement those changes, and then we're done. But organizations are not complicated machines that you can simply redesign and roll out according to a plan. When we think of organizations like machines, we take into account only the top of this pyramid, the mechanics, the structure, responsibilities, roles, processes, and tools. But organizations are a complex system of networks of people with beliefs, experiences, relationships, habits, local contexts. So this lower part of the pyramid is what makes an organization a complex system. And if you are changing the mechanics, you need also this lower part of the pyramid, the culture part. You need to have an appropriate culture to support the changes in the structure and the processes and so on. So as organizations are complex human systems, that means that the same change can produce very different outcomes. So we need to move away from upfront planning and plan execution and use an empirical approach to enable discovery and learning in order to increase our chances of success. Because in complex systems, things are not going to go according to our plan. So one thing to remember is adaptability and agility are capabilities and not an end state. So the question is, how do we build an organization that can continuously learn and adapt? So let's get back to the reasons that change initiatives fail. You mentioned some of those. Here are some of mine. Poor communication and lack of transparency. So when, those are the moments where you probably experienced or seen or heard when everybody knows about the change in the organization, but nobody has any information. However, everyone is talking about it, There are many speculations, and people wonder about, who will be my boss? Where will I end up? What does this mean for me? So people feel scared, insecure, and stressed about what will happen, and it influences their behavior. Another one is lack of shared understanding. When people start talking and communicating and using keywords, concepts, send messages, but other people are not sure what it means, or they think they know what it means, but everyone has a different understanding and perception. Absence of clear goals and reasons for change. So people are confused about, what are we trying to achieve? Why are we doing this? Focusing on outputs instead of outcomes. Well, output is something that we are going to do, and the outcome is the impact of that we did. So an example of a bad output-based goal is, which I experienced in my career, is like having a goal to have 10 agile teams up and running by the end of the year, but without understanding what are we trying to achieve at all with that. Another one is misunderstanding of the current reality. So many leaders do not really know how work gets done in the organization and what is really happening. So they focus on the wrong problems to solve. Let me give you one example. Falsely assuming that delivery is slow because of lack of collaboration in the development. Well, the real reason is decision-making outside of development, lack of clear direction and empowerment. So in one organization I was working with, we made great progress in introducing the agile teams, and in those teams, collaboration within a team improved greatly. But they were often waiting for the decisions be made by the managers, who did not want to release control, even with operative decisions. And the team was missing a big picture and a clear direction, which introduced a lot of waste. So the problem we should have been addressing is not the collaboration inside the team, but the environment around the team. Another reason is plan execution, which disregards learning and adapting. Things are not going to go according to a predefined plan. We need to learn what is working and what is not working, what is happening, to discover problems and impediments and adjust along the way. And one other I would like to mention is lack of leadership involvement and commitment. So these are like top-down approaches of fire and forget. This is the plan, just do it, tell me when it's done. There is no collaboration, no feedback, no adjusting, no changing of what we plan to do. Another thing is not building the right kind of environment for people to make changes and to change their behaviors, and not addressing people's needs and what they see as problems, and are trying to communicate. So one other story from my experience is at one client, we created an agile team, a Scrum team, that was very successful. And at one review, I heard one manager talking about, oh my God, this is not good. Everybody is going to want to work in this way now. And he was really not interested in the success of this team. He just wanted his people in the team to go back to his apartment, department. So, to put it simply, organizations struggle with change because they treat the change as an implementation. Adaptive organization, adaptive organizations treat it as a learning process where they inspect and adapt continuously. So how do we do that? We do that by using an empirical approach. And empiricism is all about raising the transparency and continuously doing inspection and adaptation. Like driving a car. We don't make a plan of that we execute when we go by car to work. We drive a car, we keep our eyes open and inspect what is going on around us, and we adapt our actions accordingly. So to navigate complexity, we need to understand a few things. Where do we want to go? Where we currently are, how we might get there, what do we need to do, and are we moving towards our goal? So based doing this in cycles and acquiring, learning, we do that all the time from the beginning. We check if the goal still makes sense. Do we need to adjust it? Where are we now after we moved somewhere? What are the next possible steps, and so on. So transparency is crucial for empiricism, and it ensures that the system is visible and understood by everyone, and that thus enabling evidence-based decision making rather than reliance on assumptions. But before we understand where we want to go, where we currently are, and so on, first we need to be able to understand each other. Vague language can be dangerous. There are too many misconceptions in reality. People often use the same words but mean different things. Take the word agile, for example, and think about all the different meanings and perspectives you heard from people. We need to build a shared vocabulary and understand each other as a foundation before we can move forward. So all the keywords, concepts, and messages need to be understood in the same way. Otherwise, we risk that we think that we are aligned, but end up doing different things and make wrong decisions. This means challenging assumptions, drilling the buzzwords, and pushing for concreteness to better understand each other. In practice, this usually means educations and trainings, some kind of workshops, and so on. A shared understanding doesn't mean that we need to agree, but we need to understand each other, and we need to be looking at the same picture. Okay, so another question for you. Please again write in the chat, what are the challenges in defining goals? Abstract language, often just things to do. A to-do list, too many goals sometimes. Yeah, no focus. Wishful thinking. Yeah. Okay. Um, Thanks for that. Um, so let's talk about goals. Focus on output rather than outcomes. Yeah. Thank you, Greg. So let's talk about goals. Goals are telling us, of course, what we are trying to achieve. Of course, goals should be smart, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, time bound, but also shared and clear so everyone understands them and can align. Good goals are focused on the opportunity or a problem we are trying to solve, not predefined solution, as there are usually more than one solution to a problem. This reminds me again of a story from a client that it was a telecom years ago. It was a telecom, and they acquired a capability, a real-time messaging capability. So they wanted to find ways. Uh, um, they wanted to find problems which to solve with that solution, which is kind of uh, the other way around, right? We have a solution, but we need to find the problem. We did a one-day workshop on that, and we did find some problems to address with that, but it wasn't very successful. So it really makes sense usually to start with a problem, not a solution. Goals should be focused on the outcome, not the output, and they should represent business goals, not activity targets. For example, this example I gave, like having 10 agile teams up and running by the end of the year is not a really good goal. It says nothing about what the organization is gaining from that. We need goals to be measurable and to have measurable indicators to tell us if we are going in the right direction. Do we need to adjust course? And if we reached our goal or not. That means that goals need to have defined success and fail criterias. Um, what does it mean that it was a success? What does it mean if that it was a failure? And we usually have a gap between that. If we land there, we kind of like, it's not a success, but it's not a fail. What can we learn from that? And how do we improve on that? And leading and lagging indicators to tell us about if we're going towards the goal and if we achieved it. So let me just briefly explain what are leading and lagging indicators. So for example, if the goal is, like a better product quality to, of course, retain customers, acquire new customers, and so on. A leading indicator would be we are catching defects more and more before the release. So if we are catching defects and bugs before the release, it tells us that we are probably going in the right direction of a better, towards our goal of a better product quality. But that also might mean that we are producing more bugs and defects. So it's not really, something that it's just it just tells you that probably you're going in the right direction. However, on the other hand, sorry, production incidents reported by customers is a lagging indicator. And this one tells us whether we are actually there and if we improved the quality of the product. Another thing is, like you already mentioned, We need to focus. Don't chase too many goals at the same time. And if the goal is too big, let's try to split it in smaller goals to reduce the effort and to increase the speed of learning. So good goals are outcome oriented, and they enable us to understand if we are going in the right direction and if we succeeded or not. So before deciding what to change, um, first we need to understand the current system. And assessment is about raising transparency because we need to understand the current reality in order to make good decisions. The purpose of assessment is not to create a report that sits on a shelf, but to discover context, clarify challenges and opportunities, and align on what to do next. It's a good thing to do that at least at the start and at the end of an experiment, so we can compare and see the effects of change actions. It is useful to use multiple perspectives, like inside out and outside view, for example, teams view on some things and their stakeholders view. And also one-on-one interviews across different levels and parts of the organization is a powerful way of understanding what is really going on in the organization and reveal the shadow organization, which differs from the organizational chart on the wall and how leaders see it. After building shared understanding, we can look at the same picture and agree on the next steps. So assessment is where we replace opinions with shared evidence. And some of the most useful evidence comes from stories and patterns, not just metrics. The purpose of experiments is to validate ideas and hypotheses in a safe-to-fail environment. Keep experiments time-boxed and short to reduce the cost and enable fast learning and discovery. Run the same experiment in different contexts or parts of the organization to increase learning. And this is something that I've witnessed many times. There is really a need for the people who participate in the experiment to have time for learning and discovery and reflection. You can't overload them with work and expect them to try something different. Also, don't experiment in mission critical situations, because it needs to be safe to fail. People otherwise just revert to their old behaviors and ways of doing because they're focused on the work and not on learning and exploring. Of course, we need to be able to understand the results of the experiment. So we need to set some kind of expectations for the experiment before the start, and how are we going to evaluate it? And the leadership has, of course, a critical role in all of this. Leadership needs to be closely engaged with the experiment to track progress, collect feedback, have this two-way communication, remove the impediments, and review the experiment to decide on next steps. There are usually some preparation activities for experiments as necessary preconditions. For example, like education and training, right? And it's a good practice to have a kickoff with the people who are participating in the experiment before we start, to build shared understanding and alignment. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? And so on. And if your experiments are always a success, you're doing something wrong. So we expect the experiments need to fail, right? If we design experiments which are always successful, then these are not really experiments. And we should probably investigate why this is happening. So once we have the change initiatives, our goals, experiments, preparation work, we need a visible system to manage it all. Visualization of the system and transparency of the system is something that enables people to understand what is happening, where are we going next. It enables continuous two-way communication and contribution from others. Improvement backlog is owned by leadership, who use it for frequent inspection and adaptation, fast learning, impediments removal, reviews. And we want, again, to focus and not run too many experiments in parallel. So we need some kind of ordering criteria here, for example, by impact and effort. But also it makes sense to start with some early wins, to build engagement with people by showing them that their efforts are resulting in a meaningful change. I have experienced, probably you have also, a lot of times people have a change fatigue. And they were a part of dozens of changes in the organizations, and nothing changes. So they perceive this new change effort only, as one more thing that they need to survive and wait for it to pass. So a good example of an improvement backlog is from a client where the management team of an IT department had a big Kanban board, fully transparent and visible, hanging on the wall in an open space with roughly 50 people. And everything was visible and transparent, and they were using the concepts from Scrum to do their work, with short iterations, goals, small goals, focusing, prioritizing, having daily stand-ups and retrospectives and reviews with their stakeholders, and everybody could just stand there and listen. And together with the open door policy, where people could come and ask questions, contribute, challenge some things, that was a really healthy environment of transparency, where people got involved. People understood what the management team is doing, focusing on which problems and so on. So treat change as a flow of improvement work, not as a one-off project. Oops. Okay. Let's talk about leadership. So leadership, this empirical approach, which we talked about, is just the mechanics and not enough to ensure success. We need change agents who work together, actively leading and having ownership of change initiatives and improvement backlog, frequently inspecting and adapting on the progress, remove impediments, review impact, of actions, make decisions. So this is not a passive steering committee. These are the people with power and reach in the organization and motivation and invested significant time to these efforts. It's not just another 1 hour status reporting monthly meeting, right? um, they are people from different parts of the organization to enable different perspectives, seeing the whole picture. And this means like operations, product technology, HR, finance, business, and so on. Because whenever you touch something in a complex system like an organization, be sure that you're going to affect something else. The leadership job is not to have all the answers. It is to create the direction, the transparency, and the environment where the right kind of culture and behaviors can emerge. A quick story. Once, years ago, I was at the workshop with top management, and during the break, they were talking to each other just 1 meter from me, and so I could overhear. And one of them was telling a story that only this morning he found out one of the important projects is already 4 months in red, and he couldn't believe how it was possible that it took 4 months for him to get this information. On the other hand, I had a meeting with a middle manager 2 days ago, before that, and out of the blue, he started telling me a story about a recent board and managers meeting with where they were going over the status of different projects, and one guy reported problems on the project, and it was a horrific experience for him. So it was they literally mopped the floor with him in front of 50 managers. And in the words of this guy who was telling me this story, he felt sick to his stomach. So can you imagine why there is lack of transparency in that kind of system? So the leadership has a huge role, of course, in shaping the culture and creating that environment where people behave, how people behave, and how they make decisions. So in adaptive organizations, leadership is not just approving a plan. They are the engine of adaptation, and they are actively creating the conditions for learning, experimentation, and course correction. So a few tools to share with you. The first one is based on the competing values framework. This one we use to assess organizational culture. It's based on competing values between different dimensions and different types of culture regarding how it is oriented externally or internally, or how flexible or stable it is. So we have different types of culture, like control, collaborating culture, create, compete, and with a questionnaire, people enter the data, and we can then provide a snapshot of the current organizational culture. And depending on what kind of change you are initiating and what are you trying to achieve, taking a look at the current culture and what we need to influence and move, how do we work with people, this is a pretty good insight to do that. Also, it's a very simple tool to set up and to use, but also, basic Google Forms with some statements, custom statements regarding behaviors and perception of what is going on in the team is something that I also used. And it's a good window into the state of people's minds and their perceptions. Something you can use for experiments. Of course, when we do experiments, we need to think about different questions and topics that we need to address, how to validate our hypotheses, and how to evaluate the results. And this is the example, of course, Kanban boards we use all the time, right? This is something that is really useful for visualization of the system, of the improvement backlog. This is a picture of the example I shared with you with the IT management team, having that in that big open space. So a good thing is you don't need a giant transformation framework. All you need is a way to define direction, understand reality, test ideas, and review the evidence. Okay, so at the end, just if I need to choose a few key messages I would like for you to take away, it's that learning how to change is more important than the change itself. Adaptability and agility are capabilities we need to grow, not an end state. Organizations struggle with change because they treat it as implementation, but adaptive organizations treat it as a learning process where they inspect and adapt continuously. And in adaptive organizations, leadership is not just approving a plan. They are the engine of adaptation. They are actively creating the conditions for learning, experimentation, and course correction. So at the end, I would like to hear some of your key takeaways from today. Try to reflect on what we talked about here and just put in a chat in short, what are some of the key takeaways from today? Learning to change is more important. Role of leadership, understanding where we are. I think this one is always a challenge. Yes, I agree. In my experience, many organizations, most of them, have a trouble with this. They don't know what is going on. They don't measure stuff, and that they're not aware of how this organization is really functioning. It starts with each one of us, improving transparency. Okay, so thanks for that. We are at the end of our webinar, and we have a few minutes left. If you have any questions or comments or a story that you would like to share.
I wanted just to reinforce what you said about, the importance of understanding where you are, right? This is even more important than defining a direction. Because of course, if you also have a GPS, right, in order to define a way to go somewhere, you need to understand where you are first. And that's extremely important it's fundamental, especially in complex systems.
Mm. Yeah, it's like when you are visiting as a tourist in some city, and then you need some time to find where you are on the map. In the olden days.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that.
I'm seeing that through a lot of interviews that with AI, the introduction of AI, where management's saying, "Oh, we've got to do this thing, AI. Everyone's doing it. We got to do it too," and then just throw it out and say, "Do it."
Yeah.
And just apply it where, whatever, not instead of solving problems,
Mm.
just do it, and then complaining because it fails.
Yeah, that's the throwing it over the wall part, fire and forget, right? Just make it happen. I don't know exactly why or what we are trying to achieve, but I need a checkbox in my Excel that we adopted AI.
We have to report we're doing something.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I won't use any more of your time. Thank you for joining. I hope it was useful, and we'll contact you when we make the recording available and slides. So have a nice weekend, and see you next time.